that?
It's true. Yeah, that's very true, Leslie. And when people stifle their emotions, it's going to come bite them right in the rear end, and it's going to come out as a physical illness. It could come out as a mental health issue. I was snapping before I had counseling. I was working in a preschool. I was snapping at the kids and didn't even realize how I was talking.
Right.
And snapping at Matt and Josh because it will come out. And that's the thing, the pressure that we put on ourselves and that society puts on us. We don't have to be perfect. We're not perfect. We're human beings, and we have emotion. And even with grieving, Leslie, I mean, that's a whole other topic, but people don't want to talk about, grieving and how people feel. And, I'm very open about my grieving, like very open about it. And I don't care what people think anymore. I'm too old. I'm too old for that. I'm 64.
I mean, yeah, that is one of the advantages, is that as we get older, we learn, and this is one of the things that I think is so important for people to understand, is that, you're talking about letting your children do this and encouraging people and not removing the shame from all of this, because, first off, shame is not helpful in any way, shape, or form, but it keeps us from, being able to find the good in the situation, which I'm sure you and your son and your husband had moments where, things were good. And, you have to cherish those things, I think, because that's what's going to get you through the times that aren't so great.
That's true. And, I've had my meltdowns, and when I had a meltdown, I came back stronger. And my counselor gave me the best advice. He said, Betsy, have your pity party. Set a timer for 15 minutes. Have your pity party and then pack it up and move it along. Best advice I ever got, and I give it out to everybody.
And I do that as well because it is. You get it out of your system. You don't try to hold it down. You get it out of your system, and then you can move on. So right now I want to remind listeners that this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking about unconditional love with talk show host Betsy Wurzel. Life and marriage is filled with twists and turns, some great, some challenging, and some that will provide an opportunity to grow beyond yourself. Some of these can be predicted, and others can come straight out of the blue. But if you arm yourself with knowledge, you will have the power to address them in positive, productive ways. And that's where I come in. If you want to know more about what makes relationships work and how to have the best marriage you can, I invite you to get in touch and schedule your free, no obligation 5-star relationship call. You can reach me by phone at area code 919-924-0463, and again, that's 919-924-0463, or you can reach me by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And now I want to get back to this conversation about unconditional love with Betsy. So, Betsy, what obstacles did you run into on your journey, and how did you move through them?
Came through a lot of obstacles. One was just losing my independence, not being able to do what I would like to do. And, when I had that epiphany, I saw things differently. Realizing that Matt is totally dependent on us. And when he would follow me around, it wasn't that he was trying to be a pain in the rear end. He was scared to be alone. And just dealing with, I spent a lot of time worrying about how am I going to deal as how Matt gets worse, how he progresses, how am I going to be after Matt dies, what will life look like after Matt dies. And, I just have to tell your audience, don't worry. When the time comes, you will have the strength to do it. And you just do what you have to do. And, well, I'm a believer. I mean, I believe God got me through, gave me the strength to get me through. And, you know, either you have faith or whatever you believe in, you know, trust your belief system to get you through. And I just didn't know how I would be after Matt died. And I do go for grief counseling, which I highly recommend that also.
Right.
But you just...
Like, I mean,
go ahead.
It sounds like, you know, you've, and I'm curious as to, you know, how a lot of this came to you, but you know, part of it is, you know, we can get so caught up in the what ifs that it can paralyze us. It can fear, you know. And I had a colleague many years ago tell me that all relationships end in tragedy, and I went, okay, that's depressing. But I mean, it's true. All relationships are going to end either because we choose to end them or because the other person dies. And I mean, that's, you know, and it's just a question of when all this happens. It's not an if, it's a when. And it sounds as if you were able to find a way to stay grounded and present, but all, you know, in acknowledging, okay, I'm having, you know, this is not fun. I'm annoyed about this. I'm frustrated by this. I don't like this. And you gave yourself time to feel that. And it's like, okay, now I gotta, you know, shut that, you know, put that away for a moment and get on with the doing. How was that helpful?
It's very helpful. I have to say that I turned my anger, and I was angry, folks, at the medical community, how we were treated. And I couldn't let this anger destroy me, so I turned my anger into a passion. I went in my car and I started to do videos to raise awareness on early onset Alzheimer's. And then I talked about caregiving. I never thought anyone would listen to me. I was like, who's going to listen to me? I'll just do, you know, say what I have to say. And I was in a lot of different support groups, and I would put the videos in these support groups, and people did listen. And they said, Betsy, you're saying exactly what we feel, but we're afraid to say it. Well, I'm a Jersey girl. I'm my father's daughter, so I'm not afraid to speak up. And that's how I found my passion. And then in 2018, Jeannie White, who's station manager at Pastoral Talk Radio, saw one of my videos and interviewed me and asked me to speak on her show. And then after a little over a year, she gave me my show, and that gave me a purpose. I didn't set out to be a talk show host. Life just led me that way. And, you know, life after caregiving, my mission and vision is to help other people, and that's the purpose of my show, is to provide people with resources to help them through their journey, because no one should ever walk this journey alone during or after caregiving. And I want people to know that, you know, there's resources, there's people to help you. And that's what I did. Everyone is different. I also was battling, Leslie, these it was a battle from diagnosis to getting proper end-of-life care for Matt. And I unfortunately had the home hospice from hell experience. And they thought they were dealing with this meek little housewife, because I am petite. But they soon learned that I have a big mouth.
small but mighty. So what would you recommend? You know, because you know, you end up with in a situation that luckily most of us are not going to end up in, but most of us will have, you know, something similar, maybe, you know. And so how can other people develop this ability to love so deeply and unconditionally?
You know, that's really a good question. I think there's just some people, well, I'm an empath, who can feel deeply and love deeply, and then there's some people who just can't. They just can't get past themselves. Maybe they're a narcissist, and it's impossible for them to love someone deeply and unconditionally. So I just feel that, you know what, no one chooses to have a disease like Alzheimer's or ALS, and you're right, they both pretty much stink. You just have to decide, am I going to let this person through it? There's a lot of spouses who can't. There's a lot of spouses who just walk away. I couldn't do that. I'm not going to judge that person for doing it, but I have heard of situations where they have. And, no one knows what really went on behind those closed doors, what kind of relationship you had to the person prior to their disease. Not all marriages are great, but and Matt and I, we had our difficulties when his mom had Alzheimer's, and just as our marriage was getting back on track, he's diagnosed. So I had a lot of resentment.
Yeah.
A lot of resentment and hostility. And you know what? Resentment and hostility against someone else hurts us. It doesn't hurt them. And you got to let this stuff go. And I did. I just let it go because it was poisoning me. And just have to clear it out. Yeah,
that's such a fantastic viewpoint of it, because it's what is it the thing they say about anger or resentment or whatever is like you taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it really is, and the fact is that feeling anger or resentment in and of itself is not the problem. It's just, I think, allowing it to fester and take over. And, and you spoke so eloquently about, going and getting help, whether it was, with an individual counselor or doing, being parts of groups where, support groups where other people who are going through the same thing, I do think that this idea that we're supposed to go through all this stuff alone puts people into a really bad position, because we can't. There are days when it's exhausting, and and being a caregiver, we need other people around us. I mean, human beings are communal creatures. We're not meant to go live in the forest by ourselves. And it can be really hard to admit some of these things, about not always having positive feelings either about the person or and it's usually about the situation. It's usually, I just don't like the situation. And it's not, like you're saying, it was not your husband's fault. He wasn't doing anything on purpose. And I think maybe that's part of it, is just that choice that this is not happening. Nobody's doing this on purpose. Is that kind of the key to it as well?
Yes. And I highly recommend, I say this all the time, caregivers especially need to educate themselves on whatever their loved one's diagnosis is, and to be an advocate, because when they say knowledge is power. When someone is hallucinating, what are you going to do? Or they start cursing at you. You can't take it personally. When they have a disease like dementia, they don't know what they're doing. They don't realize what they're saying. And you just have to be like a duck and let it go, roll off your back like water. You have to develop a thick skin. And, I always say this too, there's no such person as a perfect caregiver, because we're not perfect. And either we're going to be a caregiver or need a caregiver. Right. And I want to remind my audience that being a caregiver isn't necessarily helping somebody deal with a devastating illness like Alzheimer's. I mean, being a caregiver is kind of what we all do in the best of our relationships, and it's such a and this idea, and I'm going back to something that you said earlier about not even realizing how this was impacting you.
you and your job with these little kids, and sometimes it can be helpful, especially if we're not sharing what's going on in our lives,